You can feel that something is unsettled in you, no matter what you believe in, whether you believe in spirituality, if you have a soul, but you can feel something inside that's saying, is this it? Is this it, right? And it niggles at you and you try to push it down, like, shh, like on paper, everything's great. So I have this relationship, I have this job, I have these friends, I live in a beautiful country. We both live in Switzerland. We're very fortunate with that. But it doesn't mean something doesn't feel off.
Welcome back to the Adventure Reignition Podcast. Today I'm joined by Steph Fonteyn. She's a British-Swiss artist, two-time TEDx speaker, and founder of Collaborative Art, a team-building process that brings people together through creativity and shared vision. She is currently writing an upcoming book that will be titled Unapologetically You, to help you self-reflect, navigate transformation with curiosity, compassion, and courage. But what I love most about Steph is how she uses art and storytelling not just to express herself, but to invite others to reclaim their voice and step fully into who they are. Steph, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's a pleasure, Blaise. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm really excited for this interview because we have a lot of things in common, like self-expression, introspection, and also creativity, because you're an artist, you're a painter. I'm more in the videography and photography space, but we definitely relate as creators. But my first questions now, just to understand a bit where you are in your current chapter of life, is what would be that personal headline that you would write for the chapter of your life you're right in right now?
Curiosity, courage, creativity, or catchy enough, on the other side of the rabbit hole.
What would be the rabbit hole you're describing? Tell me more about how the rabbit hole looked like for you, and now how it feels to be in the other side of it.
The rabbit hole analogy comes from the childhood storytale with Alice in Wonderland, and obviously, when you've watched that as a child or read it as a child, you take away one meaning, but I think, like all the good classics, there are layers of meaning. And for me, the rabbit hole is about self-discovery, self-exploration. And there will be different events in your life that suddenly shift your perspective in how you see things, and that sends you down another rabbit hole, if you like, of exploration. And so I'm surfacing from one that's been going on for the last 3 years or so. And it doesn't mean I'm constantly in a hole on that journey, but we were talking just a moment ago, it's a never-ending journey, discovering ourselves, our talents, and how we can bring them to the world, and to link it to what interests us and to follow the joy. And a rabbit hole maybe sounds more negative than it really is, but it requires letting go. And when you do let go, things really start to shift and get interesting. And so that's why I suggest that my current headline is Down the Rabbit Hole, and what's on the other side. And I guess you never really get to the other side because it's a constant journey. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a question I ask myself all the time. Like, is there a finish line for this? But I think I had my personal moment, where after traveling for a year alone, I really had a big introspection. But I also think now, looking back, that I also built a bit of ego, and I thought I understood everything about myself. And of course, I got caught back into the rabbit hole you describe, because it's a never-ending journey. But I'm curious to know what is like the lessons, or maybe one of the biggest lessons you uncovered in that season in that rabbit hole you just described.
Wow. A big one I'm on now is integrating the difference between forced action and aligned action. But it's not the only one I've touched on and integrated, or still integrating, in those last 3 years. A major one was about becoming unapologetically me. So 3 years ago, before then, I didn't even realize I wasn't. I was kind of autopilot, following the routine, duties, responsibilities, to the point you don't even realize you've kind of become a zombie to some extent in life. But there is if you listen, if you pause to listen, you can feel it. You can feel that something is unsettled in you, no matter what you believe in, whether you believe in spirituality, if you have a soul, but you can feel something inside that's saying, is this it? Is this it? Right? And it niggles at you and you try to push it down, like, shh, like on paper, everything's great. I have this relationship, I have this job, I have these friends, I live in a beautiful country. We both live in Switzerland. We're very fortunate with that. But it doesn't mean something doesn't feel off. And so when I got to that stage around 3 years ago, I realized I was doing certain things, certain ways in my life because I thought I had to. And I think your upbringing, society, culture, schools, it shows us one way of how life can be, which is like the convenient, let's call it the mainstream, that feeds a certain system, which makes it function well as per the way that system works. But that's not the only way. And this is not just career, it's relationship, lifestyle. There are alternatives. And when you go down the rabbit hole, you start to realize there are other ways of living, working, being. So which is my preferred way? Which would be the way that's actually unapologetically me? And that requires a lot of exploration, curiosity, open-mindedness. So that's a big lesson, which I think is a never-ending one because there's like layers. And the recent one is this difference between forced action and aligned action as well.
I want to just switch gear a little bit now and go back a bit more into your backstory. So you were born and raised in the UK, and if I have the right information, you lived in several countries before to land here in Switzerland. And I think like our environments do play a big role of how we build ourselves, how we uncover our strength, how we also build our own sense of identity. And I'm just curious to know like how those places have shaped your sense of self.
It's funny. So indeed, I was born in the UK, but I also lived in Spain around the age of 14, only for 1 year, because my parents were brave enough to respond to perhaps an inner voice that was saying, is this it? And they have a sort of an adventurous spirit in themselves as well. And so they sold our home in the UK. They bought a caravan. They bought a Land Rover, an old sort of ex-military Land Rover, a generator, piled our most important belongings on the caravan and the Land Rover, took a ferry from England to Spain, drove across Spain to a horse riding farm in Andalusia to rebuild on this horse riding farm where they were used to going on holidays there, to convert a shepherd's ruin. And when I say shepherd's ruin, I mean a pile of rubble, literally on top of a mountain, to rebuild that. And in that process, I was moved from a British school to a local white village Spanish school where the only language they spoke was Spanish, and I spoke no Spanish. And I guess this showed me, looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, it showed me quite a few things, but one of which being dare to be that adventurer if something's calling you. It didn't work out. We came back within a year, and then I did my GCSEs in the UK, but I took away a love of Spain and Spanish, and that became my university studies later in life. But it also planted the seed of that adventurous spirit, that when we make excuses from doing something that might be on our dream list in life, and there's always a ton of excuses we can make for not doing things, and we fear all kinds of things that hold us back. But I guess it showed me that you can do that. And even if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. And because we landed back on our feet back in the UK. So I'm sure my parents had a stressful time at some point managing all of that. And I was only 14 and didn't get to see all of it. But it role modeled that to me. And I think that's important because in the schooling system, it's all about things being right or wrong. It's not about exploring. And there is no failure, there's only learning. But when we educate people to feel bad about failing rather than extracting the learning from it, we continuously live in a form of anxiety of, it's about performance rather than discovery. What if we measured people in how much you've discovered this week? What would that look like, for example?
Quick break from the podcast. I really hope you have as much fun as I do. First, thank you for being here. And if you enjoy it, please give it a follow and share this with a friend because it really helps a lot. Now, if you are a multi-passionate creator, an adventurer, or a visionary that feel called to express themselves fully, I'm opening few spots for my brand new one-on-one coaching that helps you build a brand that feel like you and attract aligned opportunities without copying trends, faking it, or just waiting for clarity to arrive. So whether you are still figuring out your voice or want to have more confidence expressing your story, we will co-create your personal brand and content with a sustainable rhythm that you can actually follow. Spots are limited, so follow me on Instagram and DM me POD to see if this is a great fit. All right, back to the podcast.
You mentioned already twice a sentence that I'm fascinating to hear when I hear it is this it? What is your personal experience of this, and why do you think we reached that point?
How spiritual can I get? I'm going to scare your listeners. Is it? I think one way to answer that question is, I think we live in a material world in a physical body, but I've come to believe over the years that it's not that I never believed we had a soul, but I've dug deeper on it, on what that means. And so if you follow that storyline, our soul is here for a reason. You could even go as far to say as our soul has chosen to be born in the human being that we've come in to live a certain experience and bring ourselves, our gift, our light into the world. And yet we live in this physical world where there are rules and consequences. So if you don't pay your taxes, you're going to be in trouble, right? There are certain rules you certainly don't want to mess with. But there's a lot of rules maybe in the gray zone, like I'm not saying I live an alternative way of life relationship-wise, but who said monogamy would be the only relationship format, especially when you look at species in general? That could be one thing that people might feel they need to question. Who says I can't live and work as a nomad creator traveling around the world, that I have to have a 9-to-5 job? There's so many layers to so many aspects of our lives that we just need to question. And I think, I don't know how many people when they grow up, they really know what they want to do later in life. It wasn't necessarily clear for me. And the things that brought me joy, I sort of downplayed and avoided. So I didn't go to study art at university because I thought, then what do I do? Like, that's not going to get me a job. So I was very much shaped by mainstream thinking as a 16, 18-year-old. So I studied Spanish. So I still followed a passion. I followed the joy. And that took me eventually into the world of human resources, where I was in a European HR service center answering Spanish IBM employee HR questions. And 2 years after taking that job, I actually was offered a job in Spain with another company who was setting up their HR service center. So that's an example showing, okay, I didn't follow my art passion in the beginning, but I followed my second passion, which was Spain and Spanish. And within 2 years, it took me to Spain, where I continued working in HR. So there are so many choices. There isn't a wrong or right, but it just goes to show that whilst following that joy of Spain and Spanish, it led me somewhere that was aligned with that joy. It was when I was in Spain, I started painting as a hobby. Whilst living and working in Spain with my second job, I started painting just as a self-taught artist. And now my father is an artist and went to art school. So whenever I had questions, I would call him and he would give me tips. And I had started with oils and they take a long time to dry. So whenever I was moving canvases around my apartment in Spain, I'd be covered in oil paint because it hadn't dried yet. And so he was saying, well, why don't you try acrylics? And that's how I got into acrylics. And then I found my technique with acrylics. And then colleagues would say, who did that, when they would come for dinner at my place? And I said, that was me. And they would want to buy it. And I think I sold my first painting for 30 euros or something like that, thinking, great, I can go buy more paint and more canvas. And it was like a self-funding hobby. So starting that hobby in Spain, I was following my Spanish passion and I was following my soul's desire to paint and create. And it just keeps evolving and it leads to the next thing. So if you had asked me at 16, 18, and where would I be when I'm 46? I'm 46 now. I would not have guessed I would end up in Switzerland. I would not have guessed I would have been an internationally exhibited artist or a keynote speaker who's spoken twice, as you said at the beginning, on a TEDx stage about creativity. Like, no way would I have guessed that. But by following, when I have respected myself and what my soul or my heart, if that's easier to digest, wants, it's not necessarily always easy and plain sailing, but it brings you to the things that are aligned with you. And I think that's something many of us have forgotten. And that's what brings us to that, is this it? It's like when we've gone too far off our path, which we are the creators of, that if you start feeling, is this it? That's just a little wake up call to introspect and look what is missing in your life. Which joys have you pushed aside for so long that you're not following? And it doesn't mean necessarily a career change. It can just be something that enriches it on the side. But why are we not following those joys? And it's a universal law to follow the joy as well. So I'm trying to be as faithful as possible to that universal law because I have so many examples of seeing that it works. And the reason I talked about that duality is the physical world, if you like, it brings us this, I have to, I should, I must, which conflicts with what the heart and soul is whispering to us. So you can't refuse one or the other. The resistance makes the suffering louder and the difference between the two more disruptive. Whereas if you can find a way to get the two of them to dance together, like a collaboration, and I'm still learning that. I have good days and bad days with that. But when the two of them work together, because you got to get them working together, that's the sweet spot. I'm sure of it.
That's very powerful because I totally resonate with that. So since I lost my dad to suicide, I was constantly searching for what brings me joy. And that's how I tapped into that adventure mindset and spirit to constantly explore what make me come alive. And I totally resonate with your message of following the joy, following the curiosity, and kind of like keep that child spirit that we kind of like lose because of obligation, responsibility, social pressure, or anything that tend to force us into what you call at the beginning of the podcast, the mainstream. And I think it's also a common thread into creatives like you and me that we tend to experience. And I want to tap into that journey for you because I had my fair share of struggle with accepting my journey as a creative. And I want to know first, before I ask you more question about that topic, how did that passion for painting did come from?
I think it was just in me. I mean, even as a child, and I was an only child, so with parents who were entrepreneurs, So obviously I had friends who lived in my village who I'd play with, but I had a lot of time to amuse and occupy myself. And already there, I was very creative, whether it was, I don't know, I used to love fancy dress, whether it was with friends or alone, but I had a box of outfits and things and so there was this sort of role play thing and experiencing being a character in my imagination, or it was adventuring beyond the bottom of the garden that we had in the place we lived in, and going over the fence into, there was a small area that was like no man's land. It was like between a common area where people could walk their dogs, and between our property, but there was a strip that didn't belong to anyone, and then there was a field where someone kept their horse, and that was like my secret place to hang out. And I built a den in the trees, but it was where I would explore. And even though it was a relatively small patch of land, it would put me into this sort of explorer mindset to go play and hang out and catch butterflies or try and catch a frog or whatever. Not to hurt them, but just because it was like a mission that I could give myself as a kid. Or it was rearranging my room, or creating like a massive cabin with blankets in my room, and when I was really young, having all my teddy bears in there and having a picnic. But just this, when I look at my son who's grown up in a world with smartphones, whereas smartphones came much later in my life. In fact, when I was at university, I had one of those massive Nokia brick phones that was just in the glove compartment of my car in case of an emergency, but it wasn't like what we go around with today, right? And how much that is taking from the youth of today to just explore, like I'm sure you did as a creative spirit as well when you were a kid, because it's almost like no one gets bored anymore, because if you're waiting for the bus, or you're waiting for someone, or you're traveling, you can easily get absorbed to what's on the phone rather than reflecting on something, or doodling, or having a conversation with the perfect stranger sat next to you. And yeah, I think that's a real shame. And I've gone down the rabbit hole and forgotten what your question is.
No, that's perfect. My question was about to understand your journey as you tapped into painting and creativity. And the follow-up question to that for me, just to discover how it was for you. So you started to paint, I guess, as a hobby, but was it something you ever thought could be a real job?
No.
Can you tell me more about that state of mind?
It was a way to express myself. I guess it started. So I was drawn to it. My father was a graphic designer, and so I grew up in their office space where back in the day it wasn't on a computer. They were scalpeling, cutting things out and merging it, and I was going into the photography room as well. It was the old school way of doing graphic design, nothing like now we have applications like Canva that even make graphic design somewhat accessible to someone who doesn't know how to use Adobe's Creative Suite, for example. So might not necessarily be the same quality all the time, but it makes that accessible. Whereas before, you needed a scalpel and you would have to do all these layers. So I grew up in, I suppose, a creative environment. And I just had this innate need to express myself. And for some reason, painting, maybe it's because I like vibrant colors, was the first outlet as a young adult that I connected with. And it started by just painting nudes, actually, from my imagination in very bright colors, not lifelike colors, in this apartment in Spain. And then it started evolving. And then I started going into abstract by pouring paint, household paint, onto flat canvases in grid-like formations using masking tape, and then ripping the masking tape off and letting the paint that I had poured ooze. So there was like the structure, kind of an interesting analogy with this duality of worlds in a world. There was the structure, and then when you rip off that structure, there's that natural ooze that was coming from the paint. So it was, I called that series Organized Chaos, but it was ways of me to express myself and even start exploring certain topics. So like journaling through paint and drawing rather than writing per se. Writing came in later, but yeah, painting was the first way as a young adult that I started to express myself. And it never started out as, oh, I'm going to become a professional artist. It's just people started buying my paintings. And I was thankful because one, it funded the materials, and two, after a certain point in time, you run out of space to store things as well. So it enabled the journey to continue, that evolution, that exploration, without it costing me anything, without me needing to pay for a storage space just to store paintings that no one would ever see. And then it evolved from there, but it was never an intention per se. I was just following a need and a joy because it gave me a lot of pleasure.
Do you think for you, creativity was an act of rebellion on the mainstream you described before in some way?
I don't think so, because the intention wasn't coming from there. The intention was an internal intention, not a FU world kind of intention. And even the kind of things I've explored through painting, even today. So over, when did I start? I started in 2002. So over 20 years later, there's still not a rebellious message or intention behind it, even if I'm uncovering things through the process that are making me wonder about, hang on, what's going on here, and why can't the world be more peaceful, for example. But yeah, but I don't really have a mean bone in my body, so maybe that's that part of me that isn't using it as a rebellious act. But I do feel like a rebellion, because when you don't fit into the mainstream, you're going against the flow. You're actually going with the flow, but because everyone else is going against it, it feels like you're going against the flow. But we'll all get there together eventually. We'll find some
Absolutely.
harmony.
I definitely asked that question because it's sometimes it's really hard to be a creative when everybody else is doing something else, and it's hard sometimes to be understood and to see where you're going with that. And there's also, I think, the societal image about the how do you call it? It's like the dying artist, and I think
Starving
it's really
artist.
hard.
Yeah.
The starving artist, and I think it's very hard in our like conception of what it means to be an artist. And that's also why we kind of like cancel it almost like straight away at school when we were very young. And I think in some way, not like in a very hard way of rebellion, because I don't feel any sense of rebellion in myself neither, but there is in some way by trying to carve a different path for myself with creativity. And I think you answered that very, very gently and beautifully.
Thank you.
And my next question is now, I want to understand the transition between, okay, painting is a hobby that you've been doing, to turning that into like somehow professionally and make it like something you can like make money of.
Something I should put down as the framework here is, as I have a very curious nature, I've always been fascinated by intersections. And so when I started developing painting as a hobby, and I was getting all the benefits of the joy it would give me, because it was a way to turn my brain off in a way. I've often been told I overthink quite a lot, and that's just the way my brain functions. And there are techniques I've learned, such as meditation or moving meditation, to help balance that. But I naturally think a lot about a lot of things. But what's fascinating in that are intersections where seemingly unconnected worlds or dots come together. What does that create? And this is and we're all creators. We're creators of our own lives, whether we realize it or not. And these intersections are my favorite spots to sculpt something that doesn't necessarily exist yet in that exact formula. And that's exactly what happened in my life. So my career started in human resources, but I was painting as a hobby. And gradually that hobby became exhibitions in cafes and restaurants, in offices of companies I worked at, to actual art fairs, galleries that evolved. And at a certain point in my life, when I was at a down point, anyone listening to my first TED Talk will know I went through a postnatal depression after the birth of my son many, many years ago. He's 16 now. And in that dark space of feeling a bit lost, again, it's a stillness point where you have an opportunity to think and reflect. And I had realized I had come far from the joy because I had all these new responsibilities in life as a parent and a full-time job. And it was a space where I knew I had to, that wasn't it. And I had to follow the joy, and the joy being at the time painting, but with that intersection point of view, perspective on it. How could I merge my past professional experiences with my hobby that was becoming a somewhat professional to some extent, and create something out of that that the world needs, which would enable me also not to be a starving artist, bringing back your expression there. And that's when I realized that not only is the process of creating soothing, it feels like time goes by and you don't realize it. So there's an element of well-being. There's an element of communication to express something. And if you do that as a group of people together, there's an element of collaboration and a shared goal. And so my HR hat had a chat with my artist hat. And this is where collaborative art, team building was born. And I didn't realize the power of it in the beginning. I was literally just connecting dots without understanding why it worked so well. And it took, the first year, there was a lot of iteration and experimentation to find the right formula. I think the first time I did it, it was 3.5 hours. And companies want team buildings that are much faster than that. But I iterated the process and tweaked the process each time I did it with a client, to the point I even had IMD in Lausanne say, yeah, we want you to do that for our clients, but in an hour. So I found a way that the clients that connected to their objectives could actually do it in 1 hour. The recommended time is 2 hours or 2.5 hours with a debrief, but depending what each client is wanting to do it for. And so all these experiences came together, and it wasn't a failure in the beginning. It was just a learning. How can I make that better? How can I make that faster? How can I waste less time in the workshop itself by having certain things prepared up front, for example? Or how can I get them to do more, get them extracting the answers rather than me or their leader pushing ideas onto them? And the visual process of drawing something, especially in a symbolic language, gets people to think about something at its very core. So imagine a company, a new CEO has come in and they're changing the values, the company values. How do you make that shift in an organization that feels like pulling it from them, that you're co-creating it together rather than one person and their advisor saying, these are our new values, these are your new values? If you get them to envision it as a co-creative exercise, even though they've said, okay, it's respect, sustainability, and creativity, for example, get them to visualize what that means to them. Not only are the leaders seeing how their organization perceives what those values mean to them, which is a nice temperature gauge. In the process, you get people to buy in and internalize it because they've turned it into visuals that they've created. So although they didn't decide respect, even if that's a good one, obviously, that should just be a default one for everybody on the planet, respect. But by visualizing it and creating it together, it feels like theirs. And then it hangs on the walls and it's reminded to them every day. And then they want to see what the team that did the creativity piece did. And they can go and look at that, and they're admiring each other's work and congratulating each other because they've done this thing they didn't think they could do because when they were 7, their teacher told them, "You're crap at drawing." And so there's a powerful element there too, because when you get people to shift from doubt to pride because they are amazed by what they've co-created together visually at the end, that is transformational as well, because that applies back in the workplace. If we all work together to this shared goal, look what we can do. And if it seems too much of a mammoth task, if we break it down into small steps and we get the expertise we need from outside to guide us through those steps if we need it, look what we can do. And because they do it in a shockingly short amount of time, again, all of those are analogies they can extract insights from. So although it is about the art because they have a long-lasting reminder afterwards, it's more about the process, and that when you debrief them on the process and the learnings that they learn, the painting will also remind them of those learnings, not just the message they've captured in it. And I didn't realize it was that powerful in the beginning. It revealed itself to me as I went along the way. And that was a way to turn my creativity and that my love of intersections into something that later became a business in life.
I absolutely love what you said about intersections because, and I think it's a great transition to dive into, I think one of the most powerful piece of content that anybody can create online. And I have actually a post coming today or tomorrow about the My Story video or a post that I think is a very powerful tool for any creators, entrepreneurs, or anybody who's creating content online to have on their page. And what you said about intersection, for me, is a great way to connect the dots. And now I want to put myself into the shoes of somebody who is already starting to create content online or to be creative and want to share a bit more of who they are. But first, how can that person try to uncover her or his journey with intersection as you talked about? If you had to help somebody trying to uncover their story, how would you help them do that? Using intersections, for example, or something else.
Do you mean how if they have a very diversified journey, how would you connect those dots? Or do you mean how do you intentionally look for intersections? Which angle are you?
I think both, to be honest. First, I think it's about identifying those areas and then combining them together. It depends on the journey you are in. For example, a multi-passionate person maybe is having a hard time like connecting the dots together, and somebody who's like feeling a bit more lost and just have no clarity on that doesn't know where to start. And I know that you love introspection as much as I do, and that in your next book you're gonna be talking about that. So yeah, let's start from scratch and see how you can uncover your story from zero to almost like be clear on who you are somehow.
Well, I'm a big fan of journaling, and journaling for me can involve drawing and text and asking myself questions and answering them, not in a way that it's to show the world that it's purely for my own purpose, let's say. And something I've done at different stages of my life is almost like a timeline. So take the biggest piece of paper you can find, find a quiet space where no one's going to bother you for a bit, and just focus on your journey and the different stages. And sometimes I do sort of the more traumatic experiences on the left side of the timeline and the positive ones on the right. I even do columns if I'm looking for certain commonalities in themes, like if you want a joy or creativity, or when you felt most alive, or when you felt most drained, like put the columns on it you want, so that as you go through your timeline, you can see what the patterns are. that would probably be where I start. And then from there, when you sort of extract what those key moments are, those key phases are when you were feeling really good and alive at different times in your life, what do they all have in common? And maybe it's one thing in common, or maybe it's a palette of things, like you're saying, a multi-passionate person such as myself. There isn't one thing, and that's challenging actually for people who are less multi-passionate to grasp. I've even had a client tell me in the past they didn't understand how I was able to do multiple things well. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, identify in your timeline those patterns, those commonalities, or those intersections, and then from there, how does that apply with what you're doing now? Where are you right now? Are you in a is what you're doing bringing you energy, or is it taking it away? And then start to add more of what brings you energy, even if it doesn't mean changing career or changing job, but just by doing more of what gives you energy and letting go, if possible, some of the things that are draining the energy or reducing them. That I think that's already a good place to start. And journaling, because when you look back at where you were, if I read my journal from 3 years ago, I can see my own progress. And also journaling helps me see the patterns over a long time as well. Then in terms of turning that into a story, if you've got to promote yourself in a certain way, well, we are lucky to have in today's world so much technology such as AI, whether that's ChatGPT, Perplexity. Someone sent me a link to a tool that helps for free rewrite your LinkedIn profile. I mean, you can already do that with ChatGPT, but I think they've particularly programmed this one with rules of what works well, and then it asks you questions. So then, if you do that self-reflecting exercise and then feed that into tech, saying what your voice is, so it might be creative, authentic, playful, for example. I don't know. It can write that, and you can use tech to help you present yourself. Obviously, it's not going to do the speaking on a podcast for you, but you can. We're at this intersection right now where we can leverage tech so that my marketing efforts are way more fluid now, that I can spend more time with clients or reflecting or coming up with the next concept than I would before, where I had to put in a lot of effort to create content.
I love what you said here, and I would definitely recommend anybody's listening to this episode to actively do what Steph just suggested, because I did my own version of that as well with but similar approach. I'm not a huge fan of writing. I'm not saying I'm not a huge fan of writing. It's just like I tend to struggle with having a journal and write into a journal because I didn't still find my thing. But I hear that advice a lot, and I think it's a great one. And for me, I have to admit that content creation for me is also a bit of that. It's like forces me to think about my stories, be creative, reflect a lot, and my adventures as well. As like those combinations for me works well. But definitely, journaling is something I hear a lot, and I think it's great to do. And I have one more question about the story aspect of things. I often hear a lot of people saying that their story isn't special. And my question here is like, how do you help them see the gold in their story? And how, with your expertise in storytelling and public speaking, how can I make that story inspiring or unforgettable?
So first question, how do you get someone to see that their story is special? And then the second one is, how do you sort of promote that online? How do you get it out into the world?
Yeah, more like the structure on how to tell a good story based on your story.
Okay. Well, let's start with the first one. I think if this is certainly not the core of my work, but it's a really interesting question. How do you get someone to see that their story is special? We are all special, and we have our own unique stories, and they are going to resonate with different people for different reasons, actually. And I think it was you that told me, in terms of content creation, to create for the version of yourself from 3 years ago. And that's always stuck in my mind, because when you start to specialize in something, you have the curse of knowledge, and you don't actually realize how much you know about it. Doesn't mean you know everything, but you don't necessarily realize how much you know already. And when I get super passionate about a certain topic, I forget how much I've integrated over a certain period of time about a topic, and that I need to bridge the gap for others who aren't there yet. So that was a really interesting tip. But I would start by just listening to the person and what their story is, and asking probing questions, just like you're doing today on this podcast, to get a real feel of what this person's story is. And by asking certain questions, you can pull out the parts that you're curious about already. Because if you're curious about certain elements of it, there's going to be more people like you curious about those parts that you're pulling out of the person. And then listen, obviously, but then reflect it back to that person in a certain way. And that could be, if you want to use tech for that, you can use something like Otter and speak into it if you don't like writing. And then it will summarize it for you. And then you can then put that into ChatGPT and even say, what are the red dots here? Or what does this have in common with here? Or how would I go from here to here? I love playing with tech as well as just my own brain to find connections. And so if you do that process, and there's not one way to do that with someone trying to figure out what their story is, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is if there's a certain theme at a conference that they need to talk about, what does that theme mean to you? And you reverse engineer it. So what do you want the audience to walk away with as the takeaway message from your story? And then you construct it back in reverse. And then in terms of the delivery, how to make that really strong, my favorite way of doing it is again merging unlikely things together to reveal that story. So whether it be challenging myself to connect whatever the topic is to another random topic, and it's almost like I set myself a playful challenge before going on a stage, whether it's Toastmasters or a presentation. How can I, it's like a party game in my mind, how can I connect this to this? So that there's a surprising analogy, and then it enables me to be creative without too much pressure, because it's a game and it will stick in people's mind. I have, for example, you weren't there for this one, but I gave a speech at Toastmasters this year, I think it was, about a team effectiveness model we use in my consulting work with Kinetic Consulting. And I linked it to intimacy. So the same model that's used for team effectiveness, I used an analogy of a couple and how they communicate to have good intimacy in their relationship. And I just made that a challenge to connect these two completely different worlds to make a very fun and quirky speech that showed people the team effectiveness model, but linked it to the bedroom. So it was like I played with boardroom and bedroom, even though it's not really boardroom, it's business. But and it was a bit risque, let's say, but it stuck in people's minds. So when you can deliver something in a surprising, creative, yet authentic way, I believe it will resonate, it will stand out, because so many people will talk about the same topics. But if you can do it differently, but it's you, I think that's the sweet spot.
That was a fantastic way to answer the two questions at the same time, because what I took away from what you said is something I think is powerful, is like either have a trusted partner to reflect on your story, to see the main moment or themes of your story. And if you don't have anybody, you can still use ChatGPT to do that. And I think it can be a great like partner to uncover that. And I also loved the way you explain how to build the story, and going backwards from what people think is like, they think sometimes they have to say something and then they hope that the audience get this. But you said, no, try to understand your audience first and get backwards and then integrate your uniqueness, your story with a different angle to touch the people. And I think that's exactly what you said in your last TED talk that I didn't see, that is not available yet, but I look forward to see because I've seen some pictures of it. It looks absolutely amazing. And that's how you brought authenticity in that. So I definitely like recommend anybody who wants to find the good stuff in their story and how to express it, just like to apply what Steph had just said, because I think it's really, really, really powerful. I have two more questions for before to end the podcast today. The first one is, if 16 years old Steph would see where you are right now, what would she say?
You what? She'd say, you what? No way. She speaks French, lives in Switzerland, is an artist, public speaker, facilitator. I think I would have had more confidence about myself at that age if I had known that. But it was all part of the journey. Wow. What would 16-year-old you say about where you are now? I'm curious now.
I think he would say, I'm proud of you. He would say that you had some hard times that you turned into opportunities and you didn't lose yourself. And I think he would be not impressed by the achievement that I did in terms of experience, in terms of travels, in terms of anything I had done, but just like fascinated by the attitude that I try to keep in front of challenges, but also the good moments, and how I try to. I think the thing that would impress him the most, I think, would be that a bit kind of like what you said about intersection before, is like how I am today, me 35, is the result of everything that happened before, the bad, the ugly, and the good. And I think it would be the most proud of this, that I took everything as an opportunity looking backwards instead of cursed or things that would have brought me in different places. So I think just like he would just have said that.
That's beautiful. I think your 16-year-old you was more advanced than the 16-year-old me, because I think I would have seen the Facebook static moment of where I am rather than necessarily at that age being curious about how on earth and what on earth did she go through to get there, which is what you've just answered, which is totally true and touching. But I'm not convinced my 16-year-old version of me would have had the mindset to think about it from that angle. It would have seen it like the tip of the iceberg, but potentially. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, we never know, but I think you're right, because of course, when we think about our younger version of ourselves, it's just like an immature person with less resources that we have today. So definitely probably not see exactly how I said it, but probably that's also how I think I would have been inspired with somebody like me now in front of that 16 years old. But yeah, of course, there's like an element of immaturity, and the biggest thing that you said, I think, is confidence, because at this age you are shaping your identity. We still do at later stages, but I think we just lack that base ground that gives us confidence to experiment, try, and be ourselves. And I think seeing you for yourself and me for myself, the younger version of us, I mean, that would give them confidence to just like be and do stuff that they want to, that I didn't have at 16, for sure. So yeah, that was beautifully
I had a really
said.
interesting, and I had a really interesting chat with a psychologist the other day, and she was saying how all the work we do on ourselves as adults, I mean, obviously work can start at any time, all those things we unlock in ourselves, those limiting beliefs, whatever the issues are, if we have kids, if we overcome those blocks in our own personal work, it's like we're handing a gift to our kids that they're less likely to need to do that particular work. And I had never thought of it like that. And it was beautiful. So not only when we work on ourselves, is it a gift to us, it's a gift to our kids, if we have kids. And obviously it's a gift to the world because we become a more aligned version of ourselves and find our place in the world and how we're going to contribute to it. So it's a win-win for everybody. So that's why, yeah, I just wanted to add that on top of our 16-year-old vision of ourselves today.
No, totally. I totally agree with that. And as I'm about to become a dad in a few months at the moment, I reflect a lot about the perspective, you know, because I grew up as a kid, as a son of my parents, and now I'm about to become a parent as well. So the perspective is shifting. And there is a guest on my podcast, I think 2 or 3 years ago, who said that he was doing podcasting himself and pursuing his passion as a creative because he also wanted to be an example for his kids. And it stuck with me because that's exactly how I want to keep evolving, growing. Is like doing stuff that we talked about today, is like things that bring you joy, your passions, your dreams. And I still want to be committed to doing that because that's how I will also inspire my kids to be themselves. And it really stuck with me, what he said about that. So yeah, it was powerful to hear your perspective on that. We are arriving to the end of the podcast and I don't want to take too much of your time. And I have one more question to ask, but before that, I want just to acknowledge you, Steph, for who you are, for what you're bringing to the world and how incredible your journey is to bring those intersections together to be yourself authentically. And I have witnessed you give speeches because that's how we met, is in Toastmastery, where we have a safe space to express ourselves and try new things and just speak in front of an audience. And you're definitely one of the best speakers I ever witnessed. So I just want to say thank you for being so authentic and just to have given so much value today for people who want to start a creative journey and also tell more of their story.
Thank you.
And where can people where can people find more about you online if they want to follow more of your journey on what you do and anything, if they want to connect? Where can they find you online?
So there are 3 main platforms. My website, which is stephfonteyn.com. Then Instagram, if you're more into seeing what I'm doing from an art or speaking point of view, Instagram would be the place to go. And that's Steph Fonteyn. Steph Fonteyn is my username. And if you want a little bit of everything, but not necessarily go to my website and you're on LinkedIn, my username on LinkedIn is Stephanie Fonteyn, I believe. Either Steph or Stephanie Fonteyn on LinkedIn. And I don't overpost, but when I feel like I have something to say or share, I share.
Awesome. I'll link everything in the show notes so people can follow you and connect if they want to with you. One more question. Adventure, what does it mean to you?
Going into the unknown, daring to go into the unknown and see what happens, see what you learn from it. That's adventure. It doesn't have to be something physically strenuous, but it's going a bit like, I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek, but I think there's a slogan from Star Trek, go where no man has gone before. I guess now we need to say, go where no human has gone before, or go where no being has gone before. But yeah, that's adventure. Go where you haven't been before.
That's a great way to end the show. Steph, thank you very much. I really appreciate you.
Likewise, Blaise. Absolute pleasure. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. All right, everybody. See you soon. Bye.